So I'd like to welcome everyone to session 2, which is our workshop 1 on language, culture, and revitalization. And for this session, from 1 to 1:45, we have Patricia Miller-Hachey. And at 1:45 to 2:30, we have speaker 2, which is Edward Mirasty and Vincent Brittain. So speaker number 1, Patricia Miller-Hachey, she is a Mi'kmaq woman from sorry, I should know how to say this, Okpiganchik, and is beginning her 7th year as a First Nation education lead with the Anglophone North School District. She's been involved in First Nation education over the past 20 years in her community, as well as the ASDN working with and the ASDN, that would be Anglophone School District North, working with and teaching First Nation students. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of New Brunswick in elementary education. Her current work as a First Nation lead is building upon and encouraging culturally responsive teaching practices and to assist educators, students, communities in the movement towards achieving the goal of First Nation enhancement agreements and to respond to the TRC's calls to action by promoting and implementing First Nation education, culture, and perspectives into all aspects of public schools. So it is my privilege and honor to introduce speaker number 1, Patricia Miller-Hachey. Go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kathy. I appreciate the introduction. So I am going to start off by technically introducing myself again, only because I am practicing it as a non-speaker. This is what I've been doing, and this is one of my goals, is to introduce myself. So, Deloise Patricia Miller, Gespegawagi, Ak Deleawe Okpiganjik. So hopefully I said my name is Patricia Miller. I am from the 7th District of Gespeg in Mi'kmaq, and I come from Eel River Bar First Nation, and we are a small community in the most northern point in New Brunswick. So that's where I'm streaming from. I am streaming from the unsurrendered, unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So I would like to take an opportunity to thank the organizers for the invitation to speak at this national gathering. I am going to share my screen, I hope. Let's see. And apparently I'm way far ahead. Far ahead is further ahead than everybody. So I was asked to speak about language revitalization within non-fluent speaking community. And that is my home. So that is on the Bay de Chaleur, as they say now. Our community is not a large community, but we have, done some amazing things over the years. So I don't know if you can see, but we have a larger version of the territory that we're on. I'm up here in Gespeg, the last land before we cross over as we cross over into Quebec. This is Eel River Bar. Our bridge spans part of the community takes us into Charlotte, and then our community is surrounded by the communities of the English-speaking communities of Dalhousie and Charlotte. So we are surrounded by non-Indigenous communities, and being so small, we have taken a huge hit on our language. As you know, settlers arrived on our shores a long time ago in the 1600s, and they were first to settle here. And as it was good in the beginning, things had changed pretty quickly, and over the years, our agreements, our our treaties were not upheld. And all of those histories took a tremendous toll on the speakers in our community. So in Okpiganjik, or Eel River Bar, our traditional territory ran from Dalhousie to New Mills, New Brunswick, and it also across to what was called Heron Island. So we had a small plot of land out in the bay. So it was beautiful, rich, lush country that we were on. It was in the New Mills area. It was great for farming. Up towards where we are now, we had a lot of fishing and we used both inland and the fishing on the shores to sustain ourselves. Once the process of colonization began, it was about 1807 when Eel River Bar became a reserve. It's what we call reserves now. This was done without consent, like all reserves across what we now call Canada, was done without consent or speaking to the people of Eel River Bar. So we were given a small plot of land of 220 acres, which seems like a lot. However, when you're trying to build a community, that isn't a lot of land. And then in 1867, we were given another 148 acres of land, which is now our total reserve or First Nation community of 368 acres. And we have a membership of 733 registered members, and about 350 of those members reside in community, and the rest reside outside of the community. And I just gave a few little pictures of what our community looked like in the past. We don't have anything much older, but I think this gives a good idea of how small our community was then and how small it is still now. When our community was formed, or our reserve was formed, I should say reserve was formed, there was some documentation that said it was swampland and it was good for Indians, stamped right on the map. So that is where they placed us. And the reason I'm kind of giving you a back history of my community is to really note our connection to land and our connection to the waters. And I think it's really important for us to know that and to see where and how that's been severed. So this little letter on the slide talks about the farming that could never happen there because of the swampland, how the expectation of use from the marshy lands, it cannot happen, and that whoever was paid for this land was given their worth in value, and we were not. So although this land was very poor for farming and much else, and very poor for building homes on, they didn't understand the resiliency of our people, and they didn't understand the resources we had on the water. So for 8 months out of the year, we were able to use the water as a source of food and a source of income. But not only that, it was also a source of communication. So things like harvesting the salmon and lobster, eels, those are huge things, trout. But one of the huge things that we harvested was our clams. We had the best clam beds in, I think, all of the territory. Our clams were beautiful, our clams were alive, and they were healthy. And we used those lands and those clam beds as part of our transmission of knowledge. It was not only a way to sustain ourselves and feed ourselves, it was a way of coming together as a community. Even in my time as a young child, growing up in the 70s and 80s, we were on those clam beds. We were running around, listening to the elders, learning how to dig clams. But not only that, it was a really great source of gathering information from the elders that were on the land, find out what was happening in the community. It was a newspaper. It was a verbal newspaper that was being used. So you could find out what was happening in somebody's house. You could find out what was going on in the community. The language was shared there, and our people came together so constantly and so often that it was truly a huge community. So I do believe that this was our main source of communication. And these are my views. This is what I've learned growing up. This is the way I see our community. And being a part of that was amazing. I do have a picture of my father here. He's with the two ladies. That's in front of our day school. And he attended that day school. And if you can tell in the picture, he's got a patch over his eye. So he lost his eye at the school. But he lost something else along the way as well from attending that school. Not the language. He could speak the language. He was a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker. What he lost was the desire to pass that knowledge on to his children. So we grew up knowing that he could speak, hearing him speak, but never getting to be a part of the conversation. What the school taught him was that an English education was important so that you can get a job and you can fend for your family and provide for your family all that they need. However, there is a real disconnect from identity when that language wasn't taught to us. So I think it's really important. What I do for work is to, not that I am doing the language, but when I speak to students, when I speak to teachers, it is always about that identity and making sure that in the provincial school system, our students are seen and they are heard, and that they have a connection to their community. So that is extremely important to me, because that is something that the public education system took away from my father and subsequently took away from myself. So with our beautiful clam beds and our beautiful crystal clear water came some destruction. In 1962 and in 63, they built a dam. NB Power needed non-drinking water to support their thermal plant. And you can see in the picture of the kids climbing on the dam in the back of the thermal plant. So the water that was dammed supplied the water for the thermal plant. So over the years, damming up that water removed the constant ebb and flow of the tides. It changed it anyway, even though the tides still went. There was a difference in the clam beds and in the way the sand moved. So it would come in with the tides, it would go out with the tides, and then it started to build up. And if you know anything about clams are in the dirt and in the mud of the sand, and they need room to breathe. So they were being suffocated. So we lost over the years, over a very short period of time, I think it was about 10 years, our clam beds started to die. And in the 30 some years that the dam was in full force, we lost the use of our clam beds. They became non-usable. All of our clams died and became contaminated from especially the water runoff, because that is actually also a sewage dump station for a town above us. So we lost a considerable amount of community involvement and community togetherness, and that was a huge impact. It also took away a source of economy and a source of sustainability for our community. So those impacts were really difficult on our community. And we saw it in the way we got together as a community. It severed that connectedness to the land. It severed a lot of togetherness as a community. We are great to come together in times of need and in times of sorrow, but on a day-to-day basis, unfortunately, we've taken on a more colonial role of my house is my house and your house is your house. We'll come together in certain times, but for the most part, you know, we go about our own business. Unfortunately, that's not the way First Nation communities work properly. It's not the way they thrive and survive. So over the years, those things have happened. Thankfully, things are starting to turn around and change and go back to that really togetherness. And one of the great things that started was in 2011, the removal of the dam. So they began that, I think 2 years in advance, and then they started slowly dismantling the dam. And by 2011, it was completely gone. However, even though it has been over 10 years since the removal of the dam, our beds are not back to normal. We have seen some regenerative health in our beds and in our shorelines. However, the damage was so intense that it's taken quite a while for it to rejuvenate. There has been a lot of work done in habitat recovery. So they want to make sure that they're putting in the right efforts. And I'm just reading your notes and your comments. So yes, rice beds, same thing. They put a dam and killed our rice beds. Yeah. And yes, a reminder of environmental racism. That is exactly what that was. So then it happened in 2010. We had a huge storm surge and it wiped out a considerable amount of homes. I think 5 homes in a small community, that's a lot. 5 homes were completely had to be removed, and 50 homes were affected by the flood, by the water. We live in a very beautiful community, but being that close to the water and being that low in sea level, that storm hit us and hit us hard. So a lot of people were affected. And one thing that came out of that was the building of the seawall in 2011 to mitigate any more erosion of the communities. However, with that seawall, became eroding away of our shoreline. So every year we lose more and more of the shoreline, surprisingly. So being on those beaches in certain areas, you can't access them anymore unless it's very low tide. So it changed the way we do things and kind of took another hit to that community togetherness. However, the great thing is we are resilient people in Okpiganjik, and I think in most Indigenous communities, we're all resilient. We've all gone through some enormous hardships. So we played on those shores for generations, and we're still playing on those shores. If you see the woman in the hat, she's actually the woman in the sunglasses in the older picture. So we are still on our shores and we're still using our land the way we started out using it. So in Ilververbar, we still utilize the land and the waters for our employment. We have salmon and lobster fishermen. Although we can't do clams anymore, we can still do lobster and salmon, and we do, and they do it well. We have community engagements, and when our community comes together, they're coming together more and more often, not only in times of sorrow, but in times of togetherness and celebration. And we are really putting an effort to do those things, sharing the knowledge, there may have been some things that we lost along the way, but we're utilizing the knowledge keepers that we have in our community, and we're also utilizing the knowledge keepers in other communities, in our sister communities, bringing them in to help us strengthen what we know, and kind of give a nod to relearning what we know. And of course, our waters, our shoreline is beautiful, and we still very much use it to play. Our kids know how to use under the bridge, and that's how I grew up learning how to cross the street, is crossing under the bridge. And at low tides, our children can still do it as well. So right now, for our language learners, we have some programs in school. So about 20 years ago, we had a kindergarten program. However, we had lost that kindergarten program. The government had taken it away from us. So, as our students, they didn't feel our students were going into the public school system ready. However, instead of working with us and ensuring our teacher could manage and mitigate any problems and really work to get their knowledge up to par, to ensure our students were ready for grade 1, they took it away completely. So that was a hit to our community. However, we still have Head Start, preschool and daycare. And our lady here who's doing the basket making, Miss Becky, she goes into our younger classes, and she gets to teach them. She teaches about culture. She is not a fluent language speaker, but she is a language speaker, and she tries every day to learn more. And she shares that learning with her students in the kindergarten, Head Start, and preschool. And it's an amazing thing that she does, and she does it with gusto, and she does it with heart, and she does it with laughter. We are still hunting and fishing. It's amazing to see that our I call them young ones, but the 30 and 40-year-olds who now have children, they're taking their kids out on the land. They're taking them and learning about the traditions of hunting and fishing, and utilizing the language to do so. Basket maker Becky is one of our basket makers in community that she was taught by her mother, and then she's teaching our younger generation to do those things. And in there, they use some of the language, they use the tradition, they use that knowledge, and transfer that knowledge to them. And it's really nice to see that some of our teenagers who learn from Becky are able to help the younger ones, and even the adults. They're helping the adults when we have basket making sessions. So, the flowing of Indigenous knowledge between elder and student, or elder and child, is really strong, because it's going both ways, and it's something amazing to see and be a part of. And then now, this is just happening this year. So we have the MSIT Nogama, which means All My Relations Forest and Nature School. So it had its inaugural opening 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, and the kids had an amazing time. In one day, they were able to learn about the sacred fire and start fire. They were able to create an outdoor learning space as part of their lodge. They were able to cook Luskinnigan bread. They were able to eat together. They were out on the land. They were working with each other. The thing with this program, it's just starting out, and they have 3 teachers, excuse me. So with the Director of Education, Tiffany LaBilwa, she had worked really hard to find funding to create this lodge and create this space. And then we have a cultural liaison and a master's in education, land-based learning student, Jasmine LaBilla. She has been working in her master's program to create this longhouse and the Longhouse was created last summer. And now it's being used as our teaching lodge. And then we have a Mi'kmaq language teacher, Chad Denny. Chad Denny is married to Tiffany, they're married to Tiffany, and he comes from Nova Scotia. He is a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker. And now in his home, his children are learning the Mi'kmaq language firsthand. And then we have a cultural and traditional knowledge teacher, Becky Labilwa, who works with all of the students at the lodge. With that, the students come out of the public school for the day, and then they go into our community and learn from the land. Unfortunately, it is not a daily occurrence yet. So as they're just starting out, they're seeing how things are rolling out, and they have a schedule for the year where they are coming out periodically from the public school and doing land-based education, which is an amazing program. So as I spoke of Chad Denny as a Mi'kmaq language speaker, he's from Nova Scotia. So his dialect is different than ours. And we have another woman from Listugush, Glenda Labilwa Wiseout, or Glenda Wiseout Labilwa, excuse me. She married a man from our community, and she's a fluent speaker. So she's taught her daughter how to speak fluently, and in a ceremonial way. So she sings and she can do ceremony. Unfortunately, they are both from different dialects, and we've lost so much that we have to borrow from these different dialects. And but we will take it. Anything is better than nothing. So the biggest issue we do face is consistency. We've had many language classes over the years. My father taught the preschool and Head Start program for a number of years. It's once a day for an hour. You don't get too much. We've had other community members come in from other communities to help teach. In 2013, our chief and council had decided to put that into their knowledge bank, and they started learning the language so that they could utilize the language in meetings and whatnot. Unfortunately, we know due to the structure and nature of chief and council, it does fall at the wayside sometimes because of the timing. But each term they try to incorporate it, so they're learning more and more each year. Some of the other things that have been going on is our elders program. Our elders get together periodically, and they do events and get-togethers for their social aspect. But when COVID hit, and we were all shut down and left at home, it was really difficult on our elders. And I think that goes without saying, that's across the board, across what we now call Canada. All of our elders had a difficult time with COVID. And one of the things that our health department, which is where our elders program sits, they got together and they created this online learning for the elders. So utilizing Curtis Michael from Nova Scotia, he creates videos. And utilizing those videos, they challenge the elders to learn the word of the week that they had put out, and then find ways in which they could use it, record themselves, and then present it back to the health department and put their name in for a draw. So it was a great incentive to get the elders chatting with each other online, and then getting them to also utilize the language. So it was an amazing program. Unfortunately, since we are, I wouldn't say out of COVID, but we're coming out of COVID and people are getting together more often, that's something that has stopped. So speaking with the elders program coordinator, that is something that they want to continue to do, but they also want to incorporate it in a more personal matter and face-to-face. So those are the great things that have been happening in our community. And like I said, because they all lack consistency, we're having a problem generating enough speakers and generating the comfortableness with speaking the language. we have people who have individually taken it on and to learn the language. We have 2 women in our community, one who has taken it on personally and speaks to her family members in Guescabegiac. And then we have another young lady who has taken it on personally to do the Mi'kmaq immersion program in Listigouche, Quebec. So they've increased their knowledge of the language exponentially. However, they're just starting to be comfortable to use it more and more. And I think that's a huge testament to their desire to learn the language. But it also proves that, you know, you have to be comfortable and you have to create these spaces for people of my age and older to be comfortable. We know our children are comfortable learning the language, but when you talk to people my age, there is that fear of saying it wrong, doing it wrong. So we have to create the spaces for our older generations to be comfortable, so that when we do it, we're not so shy, and we can just learn and learn to laugh about it and enjoy the mistakes that go along with learning the language, even though they're not mistakes. So this now comes up into what we're doing in the provincial schools. So early childhood education, or double ECD, early learning education, childhood development. The province has been putting on some work through the Office of First Nation Education. So they created a website called the World of Wisdom website. So where they have different aspects of the Wabanaki languages and Wabanaki elders that teachers can sign up and have experiences with them through a virtual meeting. So it gives teachers an opportunity to share elders and the language in their classrooms. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of traditional knowledge keepers and language speakers that they have access to. There's 2. So utilizing them, it does become difficult because there's not enough time in the day and there's not enough people in the day. So like everything, you need the resources. And with that, Anglophone Office of First Nation Education also put out, they have 4 language courses. So 2 Mi'kmaq and 2 Wolastoqey. They're intermediate and beginner, so beginner and intermediate, excuse me. And those courses are done online. So students hook up to their computers, listen to the words, record themselves, and then send them back to the teacher. Unfortunately, there's not a teacher in the classroom with them to do there's not a language speaking teacher in the classroom to do these things. So it's just doing this online, and they're basically hearing words and trying to repeat those words. But we all know that to learn a language, you need that personal touch, you need those connections, you need to see the way the mouth is shaped. You need to hear the way the little nuances of the language, and you don't get that online. So the goal of the language classes, the Wabanaki language courses, is to have students become familiar with the language and to be comfortable with the language and to have a sense of pride in learning that language. So it's not necessarily to have them become fluent speakers, but to get them to be comfortable and willing and ready to learn and move forward with their learning if opportunities arise. They also are putting out grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8 curriculum for the Wabanaki languages for the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey. Again, they just started out with the pilot project of grade 6 and grade 7. So they're seeing how that goes along. And again, it's going to be online. There's not many communities who have language teachers in them. Right now, in our school district, we have 2 language speakers who are in a specific school. And then we're getting them to mentor another language speaker to be able to take on that role as they retire, because they're getting close to the retirement age. So that brings me to Anglophone North School District, where what we do is we have a First Nation education team, and that's myself and two other teachers. Unfortunately, I'm the only First Nation person in that team. But this position is not geared just to be First Nation. However, I think it would be beneficial to have more First Nations people in the public school system. But in our public school systems, we don't really have a lot of First Nation people. A lot of them go back to community. We have a lot of teachers, but they go back into community and teach in community, which is rightfully so. But it would be really nice to have more teachers in our schools. Our children deserve to see themselves in their teachers too. We have an Elders in Schools program. So we have set aside a budget every year for schools to have elders come into their school. We have a few elders who are language speakers, so they utilize them for learning language. We have a word of the week that we're promoting right now. We also have our elders to come in and do land-based learning, our elders to come in and do ceremonies and culture, and really give those students, non-Indigenous and Indigenous students, a sense of who Mi'kmaq people are. In my school district, we are in Mi'kma'ki, so we focus more on the Mi'kmaq culture side of things. We do have conversations about all of the Indigenous peoples across what we now call Canada, but we try to really give them a strong sense of who Mi'kmaq people are. We do a lot of cultural engagement activities. We make connections with community, and we try to bring community into the school as much as possible, but we're also really trying to bring the school into community as much as possible. This past Thursday, we had a day where we had all 29 principals across our district, and we brought them to one of our First Nation communities, and we gave them an opportunity to learn from elders. And then we gave them the job to put a school improvement plan goal about First Nation education and how they can bring First Nation education into their schools. So we put the onus back on the principals on how to do this. Our teachers are really great at making sure this happens in their classroom, but I think sometimes if your administration isn't on the same page as you, it doesn't go as far. So we wanted the administration to be engaged with our elders so that they understand the importance of having that knowledge and those people in our schools. We have the Ambassador program from the First Nation Caring Society. So we have schools who have taken on, schools and classrooms, excuse me, who have taken on bears. And the bears, through me, go in and teach about First Nation education and the Mi'kmaq culture. Curriculum supports the curriculums that the province puts out and the Office of First Nation Education put out. We support and we promote in the schools, and we do treaty education, and we make sure that our professional learning, all of our teachers have gotten over the past 7 years that I've been here, numerous amounts of professional learning on First Nation education to ensure that that is going strong. So we've come a long way. We still have a long ways to go, but I think we're on the right direction. And the more we can come together and work together in partnerships between the school and the community, and putting the support behind the education department in Overbar, then I think we're going to have a really great future. So that's it for me. Walaliok, thank you for sharing your space with me. I'm just checking out the comments in the posts.
Yeah, I think there was one, it was answered, someone asked for a
Oh,
link
yes.
and it was given. And
The
but
world of wisdom.
well again, Patty, it was a very good presentation. I didn't know that about your father, that he lost his eye in residential school, in the Indian day school. So it was, I
Yeah.
appreciated learning that little tidbit of information. Are there any questions about the presentation that was well done? Leona.
Hi, I'm not feeling quite well, so I'm just going to leave my camera off. But I've been sitting here listening intently, and I'm in a similar position as you are, working in my own territory within public education. But what I appreciated, and for the first time, what you gave me an insight to is that we often think about language loss and language revitalization in terms of colonization, but mostly in schools.
Mhm.
And what you kept coming back to was our disconnection to the land. And this morning, during our first presentations, early this morning, language is culture and culture is language, but that also is deeply connected to the land. And so you had my brain going on thinking about language loss, not in terms of schools specifically and the things, the colonization that happened within those schools, but more our disconnection to the land, because the spirit of our language lives in those practices. And you're talking about the clam beds and all those other things, and it got me to think about my own local context of the forced removal and sort of the how people were taken from our territories and then moved to more convenient, less desirable locations, and the impact that that has had on language. So I think I would just like to thank you, because I never thought of language loss in terms of that. And people have talked about that in a roundabout way, but not being, because the spirit of our language, I'm thinking about my dialect and language specifically, Dakef, is very land-based. And
Mhm.
so I think I wanted to thank you for giving me a different spin on it, because when you talk about language revitalization, you're also talking about land reclamation, and no one's ever made those links for me. And I think that's incredibly important in the work that we're trying to do. And then you
Yeah.
brought it back with kids learning on the land. So I think it's just a big thank you, and telling you how much I was geeking out in the background. I was making those links, and giving me some step forwards and other avenues to explore language revitalization.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Well, I think of the Mi'kmaq language, and we are a verb-based language that describes everything that's around us. And the elders talk, and when they say, our land is our identity and our language is our identity, and they go hand in hand. It's really important for our students to understand that, and for our students to be able to get out on the land. We have a project coming up with one of the schools here in Dalhousie, and they want to do climate change and lessen their carbon footprint. And the teacher was like, what can we do with them? Can we take them to talk to the elders? I said, yes, we can take them to talk to the elders. So they're going to come in community and talk to elders. I said, but we really need to get them to look at old pictures and look at the way the land has changed over time, and actually take them out on low tide on our sandbars and see how those sandbars are now right connected to the shoreline. Before, you used to have to walk out into your sandbars even at low tide. Now they're touching, our sandbars are touching the shoreline. So it changes, the landscape, and that landscape over time, and it happens in all different areas. Our environments change constantly, but those changes in environment really change who we are as a people and the way we use it. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Masai.
Okay. We have time for one more question before we go to our next speakers. So I see Parker, you have your hand up. So Parker, you have a question for Patricia?
Not so much a question as just I just find it real interesting how the settlers there always seems to be an insistence on specifically doing it our way, and without accounting for other possibilities. There's a lot of this land is terrible because because you can't do farming well, never mind all the other possibilities. I
Mhm.
remember in researching a thing last school year, there was a letter from involving I don't remember the details of it, but but involving they're not things they can do other than farming because it was hoisted upon them, and the removal of that education program you stated, instead of working with the teacher, it almost seemed like they allowed that sort of just to prove that, oh, this is a bad idea, okay, we'll do it our way,
Yeah.
instead of actually making an effort, which seems flawed, although perhaps we simply have different goals than the government.
I think we all have different goals than the government. Oh, sorry, government. Yeah.
Governments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Patty, for your lovely presentation. It was really eye-opening. I really appreciated seeing the terrain, the old pictures, and so that was great. Well, Luwen and Namultas, I'll see you around. And
Namultas.
with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So we have two speakers that will be presenting within the next 45 minutes, both on the topic of third level education services from the Prince Albert Grand Council. And it's language revitalization through children's books. So we have with us Edward Mirasty, and he's the Director of Education for the Prince Albert Grand Council. And he's been happily married for over 31 years. And he and his wife and says, my wife and I have a girl named Lily B. I am in the final year of an interdisciplinary PhD program at the University of Saskatchewan. He's been involved in education for over 28 years, with most in administration capacities. Although the offices have shifted away from second level services following Indigenous Service Canada's education transformation, Edward's colleague and himself have been working on third level services, which continue to evolve. And his colleague that will be presenting with him today is Vince Brittain. And Vince has been involved in education for over 26 years and has completed his first year of a doctorate of education through the University of Saskatchewan. He too is happily married for 22 years and has two sons. He works at the Prince Albert Grand Council as their third level specialist. He believes in honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness, which leads to solid relationships. His parents would be proud of him as he continues with his education journey and helps empower communities as they move forward. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Edward Mirasty and Vince Brittain. So go ahead, Edward.
Dan Segida, thank you. Edward Nita Siak Itisin. Edward is my name. Mirasty Omanina, Newiwin. Mirasty is my birth name. And Little Red Otsinia, Little Red Reserve, Lackawanna Indian Band, that's where I am from. As our host has presented, we have evolved into a third level service. I want to share with you from last year, we presented on intergenerational trauma and resiliency. And so this year we have taken the step forward in following through with some of the recommendations and some of the things that we see as revitalization of not only our language, but our culture and land-based activities. So Vince, you want to introduce yourself before I begin sharing the presentation?
Vince Nikitsisi Ketesin. Vince is my name. Brittain Uma Nia Nihiowin. Brittain is my birth name. James Smith Ucha Nia, and James Smith is where I'm from, and I'm and I currently work with the Prince Edward Grand Council for the past 5 years as their third level specialist.
Okay, thanks, Vince. And I hope you can see my screen here. Just a couple of things I want to share as we begin. We had to create spaces for indigenization at post-secondary. And I want to share with you a short story. A university professor went to visit a famous Zen master. And while the master quietly served tea, the professor talked about Zen. The master poured the visitor's cup to the brim and then kept pouring. And the professor watched the overflowing cup until he could no longer restrain himself. "It's full. No more will go in," the professor blurted. "This is you," the master replied. "How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? It's hard to come to an understanding if you're not willing to empty your cup and accept new ways of engaging and relationship building." And this has parallels with what we are doing as we face a professional bureaucracy that is that moves at a celestial pace, moves very slowly in the TRC's calls to action. So what we've done is we've approached and started knocking at the door that as we begin the discussion on language, revitalization, and we talk about indigenization, not all knowledge is literate. This requires that we could create a space for different ways of learning knowledge in orality and cultural accommodation, how knowledge is constructed and passed on to others. So as I look at the creatively respecting traditions of interconnectedness, the phrase that comes out or stands out on this is learning is not a passive process of receiving knowledge from expert or sage on stage. Learning and teaching is a two-way process between the student and teacher of exploring other levels of understanding. Learning is sense-making and skill building through active participation in the world around them. Responsibility through participation. This requires that we shift our practices to working with Indigenous peoples and communities to facilitate a more hospitable environment across the institutions, across programs, and in the classroom. So when I think of what our last speaker talked about with the language and it being a verb language, it reminds me of the tribal epistemologies that are found in our languages, that our language is animate. And I remember hearing the story of one person saying it's a polar bear, but in the context of Nanook of the North, from the language from the people of our northern communities, say that it is referred to as the wanderer. So when I think of Musqueam and our Cree language and meaning the bear, it makes me wonder what is the actual tribal epistemology when you look at the root word of that. And those are the discussions that we're having as we talk about language development in the post-secondary and vocational trades training programs. So I decided to move forward with, well, what would that look like? And how can I contextualize the language in through a school year and through, I guess, my own community of Little Red. So I took the opportunity to share with you what we developed last year with the veterans. Being that Remembrance Day is soon approaching, I decided to put something together that has the language of our Cree language and with our local elders as part of the process of revitalizing our language as an example. So using local elders and using the veterans and giving that historical perspective, allowing for the language to be part of that revitalization. So as I move forward on the presentation here, just give me a second. I want to get into some of the cognitive impacts. Last year, we talked about the reticular activation system, which is the part of the brain that is the neurotransmitter that is responsible for long-term and short-term memory. So when we talk about experiential learning or constructivism, it's the sensory input from what we hear, see, feel, smell, and taste to become memory. It must first be admitted by the brain's attention intake filter. I remember my mom was a Cree teacher in Lac La Ronge for many years, and she did a lot of songs, and even saying the Lord's Prayer was mandatory in Kitsaki before it became the Senator. I forget what the name of the school is right now, but she basically did song and dance to revitalize the language and culture. And in this short little segment, it talks a little bit more about the scientific neuroscience behind what I'm talking about in terms of language.
Inside the brain, amazing things are happening. The research is very powerful and the science is very compelling. Early experiences have a huge impact on the development of the brain. This is a time when the foundations of all the health and learning and behavior that are going to follow for a lifetime are being built, that literally affect the development of all of those connections among brain cells, 700 connections per second in the early months and years of life, that ultimately form the circuits and the architecture of the brain.
It turns out that what we do every day as parents, talking with our kids, hugging them, singing a lullaby, or reading a bedtime story, has a lasting impact.
The science is clear. We know that positive experiences and interactions enhance brain development, while traumatic experiences and toxic stress literally stunt brain development.
So looking at the impact of intergenerational trauma, that is what our focus was last year. This time we want to move forward in terms of how do we develop the cognition and integrate language. Like right now, we've got a little 2-year-old that we're singing Cree songs to that my mom used to sing to her students. And so she is learning how to say I love you in Cree. She is learning how, like, one of her favorite words is mitsa, which basically is time to eat. So it's just little words and phrases like that that she's gravitating to. So constructivism, what the science says anyway, as we just seen in the video, the dissemination of knowledge and skill through collaboration and particular context. For instance, specific days of the school year are great opportunities to generate language activities through song. And so what I shared last year on the Education Authority and how they were using science and math and language arts as they taught through the seasons. And that's part of what tribal critical race theory is bringing together, and how we can move forward in survivance and self-determination and tribal autonomy. And that's coming from Brayboy in 2005 on his tribal critical race theory. Another aspect of constructivism is called exogenous perspective, and it posits a strong influence of the external world of knowledge construction, such as by experience, teaching, and exposure to models. So from an Indigenous perspective, decolonization is about centering our concerns and worldviews, and then coming to know and understand theory from our perspectives and for our own purposes. Smith reveals that Indigenous perspectives and worldviews are paramount in a decolonization project. So what we've done in the last 2 years, or at least since COVID-19, is we've started to use social media platforms and social media tools to present to, I guess, students from various levels of higher learning on Indigenous language, Indigenous culture, and land-based activities. I want to share with you, it's a short little clip on what that looks like from an Indigenous perspective.
Thrive. When we say harvesting, it's actually, you know, the boots on the ground engagement with the land, to really study the land where everything might grow, and try to have, as much as possible, develop our intuition to know where to go, to be guided that way. You know, we had a sweat ceremony before we came here, asking for guidance. We'll never find the plants if we don't do that. These are conscious living beings, and they have awareness, they have an aliveness, they have a spirit to them. If we don't treat them right, they will hide on us if they need some kind of connection.
This is a type of joint grass, but the joint grass that we is in the water. It was these plants that are out here. This was my medicine a long time ago. And this is my medicine now. When I had cancer, this is what brought me back to life. We have to help our people come back to this way of life. The medicines that we as a people give the people are alive. We have to work with the earth, to live with the earth, because she loves us very much. And these trees here, they heal us too.
We're supposed to have a relationship with the plant. That's the law. Apart from just the harvesting is renewing the relationship and talking to the different plants in different areas again, and making sure that they want to be with us. There are holes in our being. We have little holes. We are incomplete until we fill those little holes with engaging with the land. So healer's art is to identify where the little holes are and where the needs are for different plants to be embodied in a person that needs to heal. There's a term that is used in academia called biophilia, and that's a deep love for the land and how we create that in young people especially.
Yes, that certainly a lot of resources have been made available through the Four Seasons. And so what we want to do now is we want to switch gears in terms of how do we help our institutions, universities, as well as the vocational trades training to move forward on decolonization and indigenization. So we've talked about resiliency last year, and some of the specific things that we talked about refer to calls to action number 63, also learning from the land, and a good study that was done through the University of Saskatchewan in the Western-based education system, where the author of this research study followed some elders and talked about living on the land in terms of moving towards decolonization efforts. So some of the things that we talk about is what Willie Ermine was saying, is that we have to bring the context into living on the land. And so we have the spiritual connectedness of Indigenous worldviews. And we also have the development of Latin-based education, which is a key component in language revitalization efforts. So one of the things that we talked about last year is the canoe and moving towards pulling together a canoe journey, the levels of indigenization. And where are we at in that depends on the professional bureaucracy, as I mentioned earlier, and how we can move the TRC's calls to action forward. So the analogy of the canoe, we decided a while back to approach some local elders, and basically we offer especially when we talk about residential schools, it's important that when you're going to bring elders to talk about residential schools, whether in a university context or high school or a K-12 setting, those elders must be on a healing journey to talk about their story. We approached some elders with our own tobacco and did it in a good way, respecting the protocols of the Grand Council. And when we invited the elders, then we also gave them star blankets as part of the thanking them for sharing their stories of telling the truth. And what was interesting, we took a group of university students and faculty. Last year, we had about 30, just over 32 students and faculty members. This year, we had to break into 2 groups, and there were over about 53 students and faculty. And we emphasized the community safety officers, those that are training to be police and those that are training to be corrections officers to this gathering. And we did it outside. We did this telling the truth, storytelling in a setting that was part of the land-based approach. And we started off in a good way it was a beautiful day, and it was all part of the what we see here is the public post-secondary teacher and instructors have a responsibility to ensure that students have the knowledge and skills necessary to work with and build relationships with Indigenous peoples and communities. So this includes a working knowledge of the changing political and social landscape, and emerging and reestablishment of rights and titles of First Nations, Métis, Inuit organizations and communities. So we didn't want to compartmentalize the subject or disciplines. We invited all disciplines to come and listen to the stories. And so I'm going to let my colleague take over, because now we get into what was the byproduct of that discussion. So go ahead, Vince.
Okay, so as my colleague has just alluded to, PAGC and SAS Polytech came together, and we call this event Telling the Truth. And Canada started their journey in reconciliation in 2015, has proved to be a watershed moment in the history of relationship between Canada and Canadian Indigenous peoples. Many institutions began struggling with the process of reconciliation within the framework of their day-to-day operation and mandate. So we did this through a collaborative team, connection to the land, to the culture and traditional ways of knowing. So Martin et al. In 2017 found 4 themes at the macro level that created barriers for CRP, which is critical responsive pedagogy. The following are these barriers: abyssal or colonial thinking, the hegemony of westernized version of what counts as education, and discounts of marginalization and offerings, and the hegemony of the English language. It also states that education policy, schools, and national curriculum are 3 areas written through this hegemonic discourses. So when we start looking at telling the truth, Martin et al. In 2017 stated a model emerged, the work of Hammer et al. In 2003 and Durdorf 2006 on intercultural sensitivity. Individuals can be assessed in categories. These vary from ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism. An example of this would be international understanding is about securing a new form of imperialism in the world. In moving forward, creating spaces for interaction and dialogue will address inequalities, and systemic racism undertones in the system. So when we start collaborating with SAS Poly on bringing those Indigenous Indian residential school speakers in, they had to be ready and to tell their story. So under their guidance and under their approval, we created some material through this. But first, we created Telling the Truth Teacher Handbook, where if you're either a K-12 school teacher or a university or vocational teacher, you can use this book through how would you say, through lessons, and how you could, if you are a non-Indigenous person, you'll be able to pick up this handbook and utilize it. Where we said where my colleague and I, we ended up creating something concrete and something that teachers can pick up. And if they don't know the protocols for a smudge or the protocols to a talking circle and the background information that entails to run something like this, we put it together in a nice little package through a storytelling activity. Each student will take a walk to a designated seating area, and that's positioned in a circle where they'll be motioned to sit, weather permitting. And this just gives you the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps on how to do the protocol and how significant the talking circle is used, and the ethical protocols of sharing information and asking questions. So, and also preparing for smudge ceremony, what that entails and the answer for that, if some people don't know about the smudge ceremony, and also creating a positive climate. And here we made note for it is important to ensure schools, institutions select IRS elders who are on their healing journey and would feel safe and comfortable to share their narrative. Also, here's some more steps. How will you promote a culture in which participation and mistakes are encouraged? Examples: teaching social emotional development using restorative justice protocols, building top-down emotional control. How will you build emotional self-regulation? And then here, the answer: the MC will introduce the purpose of the day's event, which is to learn about the residential school, the intergenerational trauma and the resiliency of Indigenous peoples, and bringing back culture, language, and the ways of knowing. So there's nice little activities, and here's activity using the medicine wheel concept and the Legacy of Hope Foundation 2019. Have students listen to the testimonies from the elders and complete the medicine wheel chart to help categorize their thoughts as it pertains to the specific quadrant. Here, when students are in a position emotional state, the information they learn may be directed by the Amigali emotional filter to flow to the prefrontal cortex. Examples: building emotional awareness, practicing mindfulness, visualization, and stress reduction techniques, busting stereotypes, teaching students about their brains. So here, following the drum opening prayer, the smudge ceremony will allow the students to build the environment conducive to emotional, spiritual preparedness, as you'll feel cleansed. So when we had this event in Hannon Creek with over 50 plus people, we ensured that some students that were coming to us were going to be non-Indigenous, not knowing the true history of Canada, but then yet we still had some Indigenous students there that might be triggered. and might have that intergenerational trauma, those experiences that they've had from their parents and from from their grandparents. And we had schools provided a counselor on hand, and it did trigger roughly about 8 of our students that just came out of the blue and start sharing their experiences within the talking circle, which was very powerful. And we had some international students from Japan and China, and they said they only read about this in a newspaper, and they only learned about it 2 weeks ago, learning about the 215 kids that were unearthed in Cowessus. So here, this is just a nice little teacher's guide, and call us for 63, our resources. And here we talk about a graphic organizer, the medicine wheel on an activity, a background information, and more background information. But what we also did, and we took it a step further, and we, under the guidance of of our elders, let's look at my time, on telling the truth, we created some material, and we took it a step further. And this is just the English version, the importance of the circle, the importance of sharing their stories, the acknowledgements. Here we just basically gave a background of how the day kind of rolled out. And here is a story of George Mirasty and Gordon Kiwantan. And those are our 2 IRS survivors that were ready to tell their stories. And we asked them if we can put these stories into our official languages within the Grand Council, which is Dakota, Cree, and Dene. So under their guidance, we as an education unit, we sat down with each one of those, and we carefully drafted up their stories and found pictures that corresponded with their experience. And George's, Gordon's story, he was in a TB hospital until he was at the age of 12. And then he found his way back to his reservation by the time of 18. And he did write a book, and he's writing a second book as we speak. So he was taken away, and he was assimilated into colonial ways, as he would put it. And they had to work hard on the farm, and starvation, that they would steal potatoes, and they go around in the basement, and they'd sit around the fire, and they'd cook and roast potatoes. But there was also physical, mental, and sexual abuse that happened in there. But in these stories, we just wanted to keep it kind of the undertone of just capturing not the deepness of it, but just this is actually what happened here. And he found the escape through hockey. And you're going to see that he fell in love with art. And if you went to the city of Regina, you'll see his art on downtown. And then we have George's story, and he really made sure that if you stepped out of line, he wanted to make sure that kids knew that there was a strap if you stepped out of line. So, and he also fell in love with sports. And here's our 2 IRS survivors that are ready and prepared to tell their stories, and let people know that these things actually happened. And there's my colleague, there's myself. But I want to say that their message was, there's over 150 schools across Canada, and only roughly 10 are starting to be finding students, and those in mass graves where you're looking at over 10,000 kids. So once they start unearthing all of those schools, how many of those kids have not told their stories? And that's what Gordon and George wanted to ensure that, hey, we can tell our stories, but there's other people out there that didn't make it home, and didn't have and didn't get to tell their story. So we put their stories in the Cree version. Let's go quickly here. We put them into Cree, but also to let you know, we also did a Dene version, and we also did Dakota version. And there's some and there's some students that didn't make it home, like Pansy. And this is a story that was written to tell her story. And here's the Cree version of it. And this is a horse for Pansy. And there's her story here. She didn't make it home. But also going back to, if I can go back, we also took it a step further, and we have what is called tech apps, apps that the PAGC has made in revitalizing the language. Here, if you went to our website, all of these apps are free and downloadable. So all you do is just go to our website, go to the App Store, and if you wanted to learn different the Cree or Dene from each one of our communities, they all have an app, and it's all free. Here, I love these apps because if you want to learn something about the animals, you want to learn how to say dog, you record yourself and you can play, you can listen to it, say Tim, record and play. And there's all sorts of different things in here that you can utilize: kinship, season, numbers, grades 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to grade 9, some of them. And that's a cool thing to see. Here, let me go back. Okay, come on. Here we go. No, sorry, guys. And they're right here. There's another thing that our office just finished doing, more books. So here, this is on the Search and Rescue National, in other words, Canada, where these are books that our office helped translate to Dene and Cree. So if you flipped into this, you'd see their national website. This is Canada-wide, and you just go back down here and download the material. Click here to download the kids' coloring book. So this is something that our office did, and what they did was they wanted to make sure that they're utilizing and trying to reconciliation and creating material that could be useful for for kids when they pick it up. In the province of Saskatchewan, from my understanding, are the first to help establish these books nationally, and they are. And if you turn to the back of them, they actually have the Prince Albert Grand Council logo on them. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to see if you guys can see me here. Also, Gordon Kiwatin finished writing a book, and these the participants, when they did come to the Hannon Creek Telling the Truth, we gave the participants these books, and some of these children are utilizing these books, utilizing and quoting some of the material from here. And also, just to give you a heads up, here's our logo on this book right here, and they're all translated, and you can get these books and download them free off of the National Search and Rescue Emergency Book. So this is pretty good on what we are creating right now. With that being said, I think I'm under what I said I was going to do. So with that being said, Tinigay Marshall Chu, thank you for listening to me.
Great job, Vince and Edward. I'm going to open up the floor for a question or two before we go to break. So does anybody have any questions or comments about Edward's and Vince's presentation?
I'll just ask Vince if you could put the, I did put in the link to the Prince Albert Grand Council Culture and Language Programs, but if there's another website address, if you could just put that in the chat room.
Okay.
And I guess maybe I'll just share too that we did want, because of the sensitivity of the subject of the IRS and sharing their stories, which was prompted by the Grand Chief to collect those stories. We were careful in how, especially with protocols, but also having, as Vince said, a support there in the storytelling. So it all came together fairly well, and so the stories now are starting to be are being shared electronically as well as hard copies.
Okay, great. So I know Manon wants to make a little announcement before we go to break, because we're going to gather back again in the common room. So Manon?
Yes, so just to remind everyone that when we're done here, we're going to be leaving this room. So when we leave this room, you should go back to the lobby, hopefully. And then at 2:45, we're going to have a presentation from Arthur Lynn. What I suggest you do is you can actually just view it. Should be streaming to the lobby, so you can stay in the lobby. You don't even have to go into that session. And then I know that at around 10 to 3 or 5 to 3, that's when we'll open up the sessions for the next workshop. So it's the same process. Choose which workshop you want to attend. Jump into it from the lobby and they'll take you there. If you have any problems, I'm going to leave my email so that if anybody has any problems getting in, give me an email and I will.
So just to be clear a little bit, Manon, so we're going to leave this meeting and log back into the lobby, correct?
Well, yeah, you should be able to see your lobby on your web screen, but if you can't, log back into the lobby, and then what you should be able to do is then decide what you want to do for the workshop.
Okay, thank you.
So Shirley has a question about the participants. The way it will work, Shirley, is if you want to see, as soon as we're done the national gathering, you should be able to log back in to the Zoom event website for FNEAA and be able to view any video that you want. There'll be, you know, a listing of the various workshops. If not, it will be available on the FNEAA website, but give us a week to 10 days before we put them on our website and our YouTube channel. When we do that, we will email everyone who's registered to remind you this is how you can view the videos.
Okay, so with that, I'm just going to say thank you again to Edward and Vince, and welcome and encourage everyone to come back because we have some awesome presentations at 3 o'clock. There's some on social media and there's other presentations as well. So I'll see you all in about 15 minutes. Have a nice break.